Hey everybody, Mr. Moppin coming back at you again with our fifth and final APUSH video focusing in on topic 5.8, taking a look at the military aspects of the Civil War. Now, last time we were here together, we had seen 1863 serve as a turning of the tide in the war in the favor of the North, the Union. Key victories at Vicksburg and at Gettysburg will be coupled with the South's inability to gain foreign assistance, dwindling resources for the South, including manpower, and things are clearly starting to change in a way that's certainly beneficial to Lincoln. But, that being said, Lincoln still has a problem, and that problem is Robert E. Lee in Virginia. And it seems that no matter who he throws at Lee in Virginia, be it McClellan or Pope or Hooker or Burnside, whomever, they can't seem to beat Lee in Virginia. And, once again, you can imagine, how frustrated Lincoln is with this. But there is a champion in the midst, and that is Ulysses S. Grant. Understand that Grant is going to be someone that had been able to secure these key victories at Fort Donelson, Shiloh, Vicksburg, and even though Grant had a bit of a negative reputation coming into the war, he was seen as a bit of a failed businessman, a failed soldier, someone with a drinking problem, yada yada. Lincoln is starting to kind of warm up to the idea of maybe bringing Grant to the east, but before that happens, Grant is going to be leading Union forces at the Battle of Chattanooga. And if we can get that map up here real quick. When Vicksburg falls, the Mississippi is now controlled by the Union. We've now, divided Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas from the rest of the Confederacy. The next plan is to inflict another wedge through the South, and this would be going through Georgia. But you can't get into Georgia until you secure Chattanooga on the Tennessee side of the border there. And with his chief lieutenant, William Tecumseh Sherman, pictured right here, Grant is going to be able to secure victory and in the process allow for the opening up of Georgia. And with that victory secured at Chattanooga, Lincoln is going to give Grant the promotion. He's going to make him the new commander of the Army of the Potomac, and Grant's going to now be moving east to take on the man, the myth, the legend, Robert E. Lee. And Lincoln's hoping that Grant will be the one, finally, to crack the code to be able to defeat Robert E. Lee. Now, that being said, understand that, as this war is going on, you got to be mindful that, month after month, and now we're getting into 1864, we are seeing the South seeing its economy slowly but surely collapse. Inflation is starting to destroy the South's economy. They are running out of men. They are running out of supplies. That foreign aid doesn't materialize. So things are really starting to look worse and worse, even though Lee still looks, unstoppable in Virginia. Now, we'll come back to Grant versus Lee. But before we go there, I do want to talk about what is going to be probably the most famous, or if you're maybe from a Southern perspective, most infamous campaign of the entire Civil War, and that is William Tecumseh Sherman's march to the sea through Georgia. Now, once Grant is promoted to the Army of the Potomac, Sherman is now left in charge of what had been Grant's forces. And Sherman decides to engage in the invasion of Georgia, implementing what's going to be known as a total war strategy. And the idea behind that is that when you are invading, the idea is to not just defeat enemies on the battlefield and force them to retreat. It is also engaging in utter destruction of anything and everything that the enemy could use to their advantage to keep the war going longer. So what that means is that when Union forces under Sherman move into Georgia and they start securing victories on the battlefield, they're also going to be burning cities to the ground. They're going to be torching mansions. They're going to be burning cotton fields. They're going to be ripping up railroad lines, destroying telegraph lines. I mean, they're going to be, stealing food. I mean, they're going to be doing anything and everything to basically pillage the South, destroy the South in their march to the sea. Now, this is going to be, criticized as a very brutal type of way to fight. There was, almost barbaric to some degree. But Sherman is going to, justify this. Sherman is going to be basically famous for the quote of "war is hell." And the idea being is that if you do not engage in a total war strategy against the enemy, then the war goes on longer. The whole point of total war strategy is to make the war end quickly, to make the enemy surrender faster. And if you do that, then you end the war more quickly, ergo you save lives. And I know it's kind of a twisted sense of logic to think that the more, destruction that you can put in place will ultimately save more lives, but that's the mindset behind it. And so basically what Sherman's forces are going to be doing is serving as basically, nothing short of like a hurricane or a tornado ripping through Georgia. And basically he's going to be creating a 300-mile long by 30-mile wide corridor of death and destruction going all the way through the heart of Georgia. Atlanta, which had just in recent years become this major hub of the South, is virtually burned to the ground. Very little of Atlanta survives pre-1864. And so, Sherman's forces make their way using that total war strategy all the way down towards Savannah. And, the old saying is that, Sherman was responsible for so much death in Georgia that explains why the soil is red in Georgia if you ever go down there. Just for the record, though, it's really because of the iron content in the ground, not because of blood. But, that's the saying down there. And so when Sherman's forces make their way to the coast and make their way to Savannah, this is going to be a major achievement in dividing the South once again. Now, if you've ever been to Savannah, Savannah is a beautiful old South city, going all the way back to colonial times. And thankfully, Sherman was, not such a cruel leader that he does not put Savannah to the torch like he did to Atlanta. And supposedly the reason being is that Sherman believed that Savannah was too beautiful to destroy. So, thankfully, Savannah was saved, but it did surrender to Union forces. So now you've got, as we're getting to the end of 1864, the South divided down along the Mississippi River, now down through Georgia. And then what is going to be happening next is we're going to see Sherman make his way north from Savannah, Georgia, through the Carolinas to try to make his way up towards Grant in Virginia, with the ultimate plan of basically, trapping Lee between these two competing forces. But that is a ways off. Now, understand that, Sherman's success in Georgia is only going to further put the South in a tailspin in terms of its inability to get access to resources. You're going to see more and more men that had been fighting in the Confederacy for a couple of years begin to walk away. They're seeing guys out of food, out of money, out of shoes, out of bullets, and they're just kind of walking away left and right. Whereas the North is still got this, almost machine-like quality of resupplying their men with uniforms and bullets and food and more men and doing it quickly. And it's just kind of this Union machine that is just picking up steam as the war goes on. And as we get into the battles of, late 1864 and into early 1865 between Lee and Grant, there's going to be a number of battles that are going to be fought between these two forces. And most of these battles, Lee is going to win, at least on the surface. The idea being that, Lee will kill more of Grant's forces. They'll force Grant to kind of, retreat temporarily. And some of these casualty rates are, Grant's losing like 2 guys for every 1 guy that Lee is using. And on the surface, that looks like, oh my gosh, Grant's doing a terrible job. But here's the thing about Grant. Grant, unlike McClellan, for example, is more than willing to put his men into the meat grinder, if you will. The idea of, as far as Grant is concerned, the only way that you can stop Lee is just keep attacking, keep attacking, keep attacking. Because even though, yes, he's losing 2 guys for every one that Lee loses, Grant can replace those 2 guys very quickly. Lee can't replace that 1 guy. So in other words, you just keep pounding on Lee. And it's not going to be a single battle that Lee will be stopped at. It's going to be the, basically death by 1,000 paper cuts, if you will. The idea is just every little skirmish, every little interaction between the armies of Lee and Grant, his army is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And as the Southern economy is collapsing, as the Southern Confederate government is a disorganized mess, Lee is not going to be able to have the men and the resources to be able to hold out. And that's what actually proves to be true. So as we get into early 1865, Lee is, his forces are on their last legs. While that's happening, we are seeing the Southern capital at Richmond become invaded by Union forces. And Richmond will be absolutely savagely bombed by Union cannon fire. They are just gonna destroy the city of Richmond. You can see here, this looks like Berlin after Allied bombings in 1945. This is really, really rough stuff. But Richmond is now basically been turned to rubble. And really the only thing that's left now is Lee kind of running around in central Virginia, ducking and weaving and trying to hold on as Grant just keeps poking him and poking him and poking him. And every time just, making Lee's forces just a little bit weaker, a little bit weaker, a little bit weaker. And, Grant is playing the numbers game, and it ultimately works out in his favor, finally ending at Appomattox Courthouse. At Appomattox Courthouse, we're going to be seeing, Lee finally agree to surrender. And this is going to prove to be a very pivotal moment in what the future of America is going to be. Will Grant, treat these Confederate officers and soldiers as rebellious traitors or as respected fellow Americans? And that's going to be pivotal. Usually in history, when there is a revolution or a civil war or something like that, and the ones that are doing the rebelling lose, generally what happens is that those rebels that lose, those political and military leaders, they all get executed. They all lose their lives. Their property becomes forfeit. It's just a bloodbath, if you will. And that certainly could have been the case in this war as well. But Lincoln will give very explicit orders to Grant, which Grant supports, that this is not going to be a victory that is going to be predicated on revenge against the South. In other words, yes, there's going to be consequences for the war, but the idea that these are truly traitors in the United States, that is not really what's going to be expressed. So basically what Grant tells Lee at the meeting at the surrender is that, listen, tell your guys to go home. They're not going to be arrested. They're not going off to jail. Tell them to go back to their farms. Tell them to go back to their families. Tell them to start their lives once again. And that's a very magnanimous gesture to kind of send the message that there's been enough bloodshed over the last 4 years. There's already been hundreds of thousands of men that have been killed in this war. We're not going to continue this bloodbath after the war is over. So that's very, very telling moving forward. So Lee finally vanquished by Grant. I don't know if I would say that Grant outgeneraled him, but clearly the resources at the North's disposal will clearly outdo the South for sure. So we're going to leave it there. Finally, after 5 videos, we have finished the fighting in the Civil War. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.